Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women to unlearn conventional rules and create businesses of significance. Each season, She Rebel Radio brings you insights and advice from noteworthy women entrepreneurs who strive to create more meaning, impact, and purpose. Now here is your host, Lulu Minns.
Welcome to episode 74 of She Rebel Radio. How do we define feminine success? Today you are joining our first She Rebel Roundtable discussion with guest speaker Amy Mckeown. Amy is an award-winning mental health and wellbeing specialist and a leading expert working particularly with the mental health of women, and she recently founded the Business of Being a Woman conference. Amy has, of course, previously appeared on She Rebel Radio, and today you are joining not just Amy and I, but many of our previous guests and listeners of the show as we explore the question, how do we define feminine success? This is a question I've been exploring with clients since 2016 and provided expert guidance upon. In fact, I have a whole 6-month feminine success course for which I'm going to tell you at the end of today's episode how you can get access for free to the first month of that course. We explore during this episode that at the present time, we are currently in the midst of a breakdown of the systems and structures in society that upholds a masculine paradigm of power and success. They are old, outdated, and not working. And you probably have noticed there's a big power struggle around this paradigm of power and success at the moment. But what happens is that creates a gap and a void, one which I like to call no woman's land. A void which can be filled with the reintroduction of feminine principles and a more feminine paradigm of success, one which women will need to lead and reintroduce. But what on earth does that look like? And what are the problems we face in doing that? Now, I started with asking Amy about her interpretation of seeing these systems and structures collapse and what she thinks is going on.
It's quite fascinating to watch, isn't it, at the moment? I mean, where we are on a sort of global and planetary scale is just sort of complete systemic meltdown in everywhere you look, really. You know, I'm a real optimist, perhaps naively sometimes, and I'm a real, I love change, because change is what, you need to kind of get rid of. Change usually leads you to a better place. So, but you have to, in order to rebuild, the old systems have to come down. And I can't think of obviously, where we are now, sort of 2021, the pandemic. Can't help thinking that the pandemic is the catalyst to some of the change that we've already been seeing. But everywhere you look, politically, financially, in terms of organizations, Me Too, all of those things, seeing old systems sort of come down, and as you said, Lulu, it's very interesting watching what will then take those spaces, because I just think, especially generations beneath us, I'm 40, so if you speak to millennials or graduates or people like that, they're not prepared to put up with things the same way, even 20 years ago it was. So I think it's fascinating, if a little bit discombobulating to watch. But this is one of a number of conversations I've been having on the feminine in the last couple of weeks. So really, really lovely to see women's voices finally coming out,
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've been saying for a number of years as well, before all great change comes a shitstorm. We've definitely been in the midst.
I was wondering if I could use that word. So now that you've used it, I feel less bad, because, I was sort of like thinking I better just make sure my audience is appropriate here,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, being She Rebel Radio, there are no rules whatsoever.
Okay, that's good to know, because I was about to talk about the pandemic being an utter shit show for women, and I wasn't sure if that was the right language. So I was graspingly thinking what I should be using instead,
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask you, in terms of, the pandemic's had a devastating effect on women in terms of mental health and well-being, and and on women's rights, finding many women finding themselves not being able to focus on businesses, careers, all of that kind of stuff. Have you got any statistics and things like that you can share with us from?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've pulled out a few. And Sylvie, you put the age of Aquarius. Again, I was testing my audience because I was thinking if I start banging on about the fact that we gently went into the age of Aquarius in February, whether or not everyone would be lost from me for the rest of the episode. But yeah, like the age of Aquarius, which we're now technically in, is all about digital and quantum, but it's all about cooperation and collaboration, and watching the systems burn is kind of is seeing that process. But yeah, in terms of women in the pandemic, I think shit show, quite frankly. We're at the most scary time, I believe, for women's rights since the end of World War II, when women who'd been working in factories and wearing trousers got pushed back into the home, back into kitchens and skirts. So I think we're at that point. Yeah. I hope that we are, with more awareness and with all of the kind of age of Aquarian things, like, I'm talking to 27 of you from my office downstairs. We've got the tools to be able to rebuild. But yeah, the stats have just been shocking. I mean, I'm looking at some now. Yeah. Women, 99% of unpaid childcare during the pandemic. I'm speaking from my office and I'm feeling quite smug because my 3-year-old's nursery has shut for the 3rd time since Christmas. So when I found this out on Friday, I was like, that is another 10 days I'm going to have a 3-year-old at home. But what I did was I convinced my partner to take my 3-year-old up to Manchester to stay with my parents for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So he's up there and I've got the 7-year-old in London, which means I've actually got some time. But this was calculated if I just don't have any more space without my children. My career is just already like flatlining because of a lack of momentum.
Yeah. And an interesting statistic in terms of that 99% of the childcare has been put on women in the pandemic, because I think it's in Invisible Women. The statistic is 75% of the world's unpaid work is completed by women. So what we've seen happen is that magnify as the pandemic hits. And to note, ladies, as well, a lot of the time when the government make changes in terms of power and decisions at times of crisis, they don't always change them back. I.e., VAT was introduced in the war for an emergency, and here we are many years later still paying VAT and all of that kind of stuff. So it's just really important to note, and how many conversations where women have been missed out of the conversation.
And not just VAT, we're paying 20%, which was emergency during the recession. But I'm a prime example of this. I had a very extreme miscarriage in between my 2 children and was off work for 2.5 months and was then made redundant on my return. So I'm one of the sort of 54,000 women a year who get made redundant in or around pregnancy. The stat shows 54,000 a year within 1 year of pregnancy. And I then got pregnant again. So I didn't qualify for maternity allowance and I wasn't employed. So I didn't get any statutory maternity pay. So none of that. And then I got pregnant again, couldn't get a job because I was pregnant and no one would employ me. But I wasn't eligible for child benefit because my partner earned over £50,000. So having paid into the tax system for years, I didn't get anything out. I then rebuilt my career and was starting to get some momentum in it when the pandemic hit and everything stopped. But again, this is the cracks, you see. I have received no help from the government for 2 reasons. Firstly, I'm a limited liability company and have been for ages because large clients won't work with me otherwise. So I don't get any compensation or support anyway, no. But if I was self-employed or furlough, because I've had a baby in the last 3 years, I still wouldn't get any support from government, because the government policy is that unless you can show 3 years of collective accounts, you don't get any help from the government for COVID. And Pregnant Then Screwed have taken them to court and have lost. There was a 37-page appeal against Pregnant Then Screwed, showing
is that during the pandemic?
Yeah. So if you're a woman who's have given birth in the last 3 years, if you're furloughed, your furloughed payments are going to be lower. But if you're self-employed or freelance, because you can't show 3 consecutive years of account because of that. So, I mean, it's just been a disaster for women, all these policies, and I don't see it changing.
No, absolutely. Any other statistics you want to share with us on that?
Just that women are doing 2.75% more hours extra a day in terms of keeping the show on the road housewise as well. So, as well as not getting any money from the government to support us, we're doing all the homeschooling and the work. But also women are most likely to have been made redundant because of the sort of work that people are doing. A lot of it seems to be in hospitality or in caring professions. So redundancy, I think 80% more likely to be made redundant if you're female as well.
Okay.
So, utter disaster quite all around.
Mm-hmm. We've got Claire Carson actually on, who volunteers for pregnant and then
Claire, well, I love Pregnant and Screwed. They helped me through my redundancy, and we ended up taking it a very, very long way. And Pregnant and Screwed and Jodie supported me throughout. So I do everything I can. And I'm actually campaigning to change the law around miscarriage, and Pregnant and Screwed are helping me. So I make a point of saying how great they are in every interview I do.
Amazing. Really? Yeah. And Mo's mentioned about care of elderly relatives as well. Claire, we're going to unmute in a minute, if that's all right, just to kind of wrap up this part. Amy, can you share with us in terms of the impact on mental health for women with that extra 2.7 hours of work, of childcare, of not getting funding from the government, etc.?
Yeah, well, I've always been my background is health and mental health. My day job is writing big health and mental health strategies, and I've been in it 20 years. So I've always been interested in mental health, and I've always been interested in women. And women's mental health is different to men's anyway. So women are more likely to have anxiety and depression. We are more likely to show different symptoms in things like bipolar and schizophrenia. And there are a lot of conditions that are affected by our hormones. There's never been any research done on that. And there are some types of depression, such as postnatal or menopausal or things like that, which are not male, like men don't have. So women's mental health, not really understood. We don't really talk about it anyway. But what we have seen since the pandemic is that women are showing more stress, more anxiety, more depression, and 80% more perceived loneliness. So mental health as a whole has gone up, but it's gone up more in women anyway, and in some of the conditions that actually women showed more of before the pandemic. So really tough time. And yeah.
Okay, so what is the challenge for women to maintain their own mental health and needs? I know I've heard that you've mentioned it's twofold, the challenge for women to maintain mental health.
So when I'm talking, and I do quite a lot of talking now in organisations about women's stuff, I can see Rebecca Boston's just joined. We talk often together about hormones and the impact of hormones. But the two things for women in terms of mental health, so in terms of looking after your own mental health, are firstly, I think majority of women, I'm obviously not going to speak for all of us, are completely unaware of their own needs. Like since we are children, we're told what we should look like, what we should wear, what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. Most of the depictions of women in the press and in media and on TV and film are so disconnected from the reality of people's, the normal, woman down the streets bodies, that I think we've got a very skewed perspective of what we should be eating, our own health, but we're very disembodied. So firstly, it's about really doing the work to understand who we are and what we need, and actually owning, we're talking a lot about kind of the female and the feminine voice coming in from the masculine. Part of that is unpicking what it is to be a woman in terms of health and needs and understanding our cycles and what we want. So that's the first part. But the second part is that also, as well as us completely divorcing ourselves from our own female bodies and our experience of being a female from a physical and mental perspective, society's also encouraged us, as well as not knowing who we actually are and what we want, that we shouldn't really care. In that the role of women in many societies is to put everybody else's needs above our own. So it's that if we knew what those needs are is one thing, but the fact is that the role of women and the role of motherhood and the role of kind of who we are in society doesn't encourage us to actually make the space to address those needs. And often a lot of women are taught to derive validation from how we make other people feel, as opposed to looking after ourselves. So I think those are the two main things. It's like, firstly, knowing who we are and what we need and honouring that, which is a work in itself. But it's secondly, unpicking our behaviours around giving ourselves a space to fulfil those needs from all of the roles about what we should be doing and who we should be looking after, and getting our validation from others.
Absolutely. Amazing. Thank you for sharing how that's twofold. And I think most of you can resonate with one or the other, or potentially both. We've also got Keely Olivia here, who was our last She Rebel Radio guest, which we'll hear from you once we've done the breakout rooms, Keely. But we talked about in the last podcast episode in terms of that female sexuality and female power, and how the repression of that has affected women, and it being a real embodiment to re-embrace that. So that's an incredible episode to listen to, as well as yours, Amy. So we've got some incredible women here, and thank you for sharing. After the initial introduction from Amy and I asked the wider group to break out into discussion to explore, firstly, how do we define feminine success and use it as a platform for a more inclusive model? And secondly, what responsibilities do we have as women with access to resource? Here is what we came up with. Hey Mo.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. Good to see you.
Yeah, we had a really good chat in our group. A lot of us have come from corporate backgrounds, so we all talked about how things were in corporate life and how actually that wasn't good for anyone. So when we talk about feminine success, we're not saying it's going to be bad for men. We're redefining to something better for everyone. And so we talked about, that culture of the long hours and the traveling. It wasn't good for men either. So we're talking about redefining into something better for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that, Mo. I quite often say, like, every She Rebel wants freedom, but not just for herself. She wants it for everybody else. And it's inclusive in nature when women start looking at this stuff. So, yeah, that's amazing. Good conversation. Anything else? So inclusive and beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, in our room, Lulu, we were all we all run our own businesses, which was interesting. So we all had our own businesses, and none of us had really thought about sort of feminine success and that feminine side of things. We'd all just kind of got on with it, although some of us were coming round to thinking about that over the past few months, but we'd never really, I think it's fair to say, Joe and Roisin, Sue and Louise, that we'd never before the pandemic had thought about it.
Amazing. So is the pandemic been a bit of a catalyst in terms of thinking about what that actually looks like and how that may differ?
Certainly for me, and I think that's what came across in the room, but I can't speak for the other ladies, of course.
Yeah, no. Lovely. Anyone else want to share who was in Sarah's group?
I was just going to say I just completely agree with. Hello. Again. So yeah, just agree with everything Sarah just said. We were just talking about just following your gut, and definitely for me, it's a feeling of like having not ever felt like I fit in, or I'm not really working the right way I'm supposed to, where I have got a job or in interviews, like not saying the right thing, or people are not understanding where you're coming from. And I definitely feel like there's just been a shift lately. And especially I'd say it on LinkedIn as well. Actually, I deleted LinkedIn ages ago because I was like, I'm sick of this, it's useless, I don't like it. And I've come back to it like 10 years later and gone, oh, everyone's talking about kindness and being intuitive, and it just feels like a real shift. And that, along with being part of this group, I just feel much more seen.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and I was thinking that actually, with launching this event, a couple of weeks ago, it's something I've been talking about for a number of years, but wasn't something that I felt I could even put out there on LinkedIn, 4 years ago, because people have been like, what's she talking about? Feminine success. There's not much difference in terms of masculine success, but it's becoming much more common vocabulary, and something that women, we're understanding at a very deep rooted, intuitive level. And supporting each other with. So, yeah, amazing. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Who else would like to share conversation in their group?
Lulu, I was in a group with Rosie and others and Amy, and actually Rosie made a really good point, actually, when she deals with her clients. It's about asking that first question, what does success mean for you? Mm-hmm. And because it's like Sarah said, people don't often think about that. It's the first question. Yeah. What does success mean for you? Does it mean that you're able to work 1 day a week? Does it mean you're able to take your dogs for a walk in the morning and all the rest of it? And that's just, I think that's crucial. in defining what success means, and for everybody, not just necessarily feminine, but for everybody, especially those people that are coming away from the corporate world. It's like, okay, so I've done that, I've done those hours, and it wasn't what I wanted to, I've come away from it. So what does success mean for me right now? And it's different for everybody. It might be that you're quite happy doing a 40-day week because it's your own business and you want to, your measure of success is the financial one. But actually, it might also be, I want to work 2 or 3 days a week, and the rest of the week I want to do what the hell I want to do.
Yeah.
That's what he was saying.
Great insight. And I was going to say, actually, in my intro, because I'm a bit rusty today, that Amy and I definitely connect on, feminine success and feminine principles, because it's not linear. There's no, single destination. And also Nikki and Sarah from the MNC network, who are here today, I think a massive reason of such success of previously mumpreneurs, now MNC, is really supporting women to define success on their terms, and it's not necessarily the 6 figures or whatever it might be. It's having that more freedom and flow around family and things like that. So
Well, I was in that group as well, and I think one of the points that Rebecca made a really, really interesting point, which is, and I don't want to talk over because she might want to say it herself, but she's very successful in a corporate and enjoys that. I think the challenge that we have, and I was on a group conversation with women from across the globe talking about something similar last week, is that a lot of us who aren't in the corporate world anymore was because it didn't really work for us. And actually, if you look at people at the top of whatever they're in, like Angela Merkel and Priti Patel and Theresa May, they're the first people who come to my head in terms of being at the top of politics, but they haven't had children. And the conversation that we had last week on this platform was about, there were women in there thinking that if they wanted to get to the top of things and have the salary and the job title and the status, then that meant not having a family. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to be very careful when we define feminine success, that we're not just hoovering up the scraps at the bottom. Like, it's ridiculous to have a society where the only way you can get to the top is if you choose not to have children. I don't know a man that would make that decision.
No. It's and I know, Amy, when I was still in corporate, on track for partnership in the law firm, I was asked a number of times, in my late 20s, early 30s, whether I was going to have kids. And you were I quite often say, damned if you do and doomed if you don't, because you don't fit in if you don't. And if you do, potentially not, climbing the ladder. But again, I think things are massively changing. But yeah, it's a really important.
As the corporate world, we need to be, Rebecca's point, which was that she loves being there. And a lot of her friends who left or opted out aren't necessarily happier as a result, I think is an important one, because it needs to be how we change the corporate world and systems. And COVID is the best way of doing that, because actually now that people can remote work and flexibly work, we've got a chance to chip away at this ridiculous structure of 9 to 5 or 40-hour weeks at client sites when kids are home. Like, this is the time that we actually need to be making the corporate world more accessible for people that want to work, for women that don't want to work, that fits into our success and what we define as it.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just say, so I agree with everything you're saying, but I think we have to look bigger picture. I think this is not, here and now is fantastic, but I'm sure many of you have got daughters. I don't, I have a son, but I'm thinking about the future. And in my experience, having worked with lots and lots of women, I think the big thing for me is not about asking permission. And also, if you don't get up into those senior positions, you're not going to change policy. And I think that's one of the most important things, is that it's got to be a trickle down. It has to be, because otherwise, as back to your point about BAT, it's still there. It doesn't change. Mm-hmm. But actually, you need to be in those positions where you can have a voice and you can actually change things. And for me, that is absolutely key. I mean, in my industry, when I started, I was one of the first women to have a child and carry on and get quite senior. And I don't want that for other women, because none of my contemporaries did. Mm-hmm. But we have to change the agenda if we want to change it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of this, thanks to Ryan for sharing of this conversation, is how, there's many women, myself included, running my own business and supporting women in terms of feminine principles. That how does that trickle through into corporate? A number of my clients are consultants that work within corporate environments, but quite often needing that maybe, connection of feminine principles and discovering that outside of the corporate environment so they can bring it in, because they're quite masculine systems and structures that have been built, but absolutely need women in those places and women to use their voice, as Lindsay said, and to self-authorize. as well. So have you got any insight on how that can be done?
Sorry, did you mean me, Lulu?
Yeah.
Can you just repeat what you said?
Yeah. Any insights in how more feminine-based principles can be included in corporate systems and structures that already pre-exist?
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting, because I'm kind of thinking about it from a different point of view at the moment, because of the brain and neurosciences, which is what I've been studying. There are no male and brain differences. I mean, the last one has just been completely blown out the water, which is really quite incredible.
Yeah.
That we're the same. So I think when you're talking about masculine and feminine principles, I think it's much more about a hybrid, because you're going to have some women with more masculine traits and hormones, and some women, so I think it's much more about us becoming impartial towards it and actually working together for the future, because to all the points you're making, a lot of men don't want this way of life either. They want
no, exactly, which is in terms of what we're saying is actually feminine principles are inclusive and beneficial to men as well, but it's much more of an energetic, more embodied standpoint than the brain. It runs at quite a deep level, but it may be kind of a new concept in that respect. But we all have masculine and feminine energy. It's just that we live in a world that values the masculine way of doing things over the feminine. So it's about how we can bring that in, which is much more embodiment, much more feeling, much more flow, much more creativity, and much less linear, which again could be quite an alien concept in terms of corporate and corporations.
Lulu, that definitely came up in our group. I was in the same group as Soraya, and we were saying that some of the language needs to change as well. Let's use our own language instead of trying to fit into the language and the structures that have been created that may be outdated or maybe serve some people, but not all of us. So even the word success conjures up, sports cars or six-figure salaries or retiring early or whatever it is. And although it means different things to different people, that there's almost a kind of an association. And so to talk much more about, I said values and Soraya said purpose and things. And you're absolutely right that they're not easy to measure. They're not tangible. So it's very difficult for some people or some corporations to be able to measure them. Well, how do we know you're working hard enough or getting enough deals or whatever it is that you do if we can't put a number next to that or tick a box? But somebody just said in the chat about using our voice, and yeah, absolutely. And let's use the language that suits us until it becomes more prevalent, because I think it was Louise who said, coming off LinkedIn, just, but the noise does change. And if we can, I agree with Soraya, get in at the top and change those policies. But if that's not your thing, just keep using that language, keep, drip feeding. And I think more organisations are focusing on things like values and their culture. Not all of them, of course, but if there's an inkling of a trend and we all jump onto that wave, it's going to be much bigger, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And love the use of the word of values there, because I quite often say that's a very feminine principle as an example, and women, although not exclusively, massively need to feel valued wherever they are, whether that's in their own business or within a corporate system and structure, whereas a more masculine principle is respect. Not that we don't want both, we do, because we all have masculine and feminine energy, but there's, it's not about ditching the masculine stuff that's there, it's about bringing more of those feminine principles in, and valuing is being one. And I know, in corporate, I have respect. Was I valued? No, not to the level that I wanted to be valued for what I was bringing in. And again, I feel like that is something that really is starting to change in corporate. That's not my gig anymore.
Can I say something? Because the blunt fact is, and is that we live in a world which is valued pretty much by money, right? Actually everything has a cost. And what I see, most money in the world is owned by men and actually run by men. And most of the big companies that make money are run by men. And, a lot of, so actually, in order for us as women to be successful, I see lots of women who are doing amazing work, and all of the unpaid child work and stuff we were talking about before, it's all unpaid. If we live in a society that values things by money, then these things, we have to be earning the same amount or more than the others, otherwise there's no value. I see loads of women who are doing great work in menstruality who are scratching around, earning beans and peanuts. And you think, well, the corporate world is earning this amount. But for us, for this to be valued as much as we say it is, then actually this sort of money, we need to pay for it. The money needs to drip through for women as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It does, definitely. Keely, can you share something with us about embodiment and from the feminine perspective?
Yes. So I was actually just thinking about, there's a quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and it's kind of been like the leading quote of my work. And it says, a woman cannot make the culture more aware by saying change, but she can change her own attitude towards herself, thereby causing devaluing projections to glance off. She does this by taking back her body, by not forsaking the joy of her natural body. And it kind of goes on. And a lot of the conversation is around how we impact within systems. And my work is kind of more about the grassroots internal shift, like as more women change their own attitude towards themselves, to realize the value of their own body, to choose joy within their own body, this impacts everything. And this changes wherever the woman is within a workplace, because she's connected to her sense of joy, life, celebration, whatever that is, sexiness, aliveness, like that actually changes how it is in important, meetings. I used to work in academia, and so many women are just disconnected from their sense of joy and just living out this kind of mundane life, and it's all very serious. And I think we get to choose joy, choose life, and that actually impacts so much. And that is what embodiment gives. It gives a sense of life and joy.
Is that, do you feel?
Know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does to me. Hopefully it will. It depends where people are in terms of their journey. But do you think, in terms of that, Keely, as Louise said, that shifts the point from where women are sitting there, like Louise said, thinking you've got to be someone that you're not, to try and fit into this system and structure that exists. And women do very well and flourish within that as well, and some don't. But it's also what we're talking about is how we change it. And as you said, saying let's change it is not enough. We have to do the work on ourselves to change that and bring, a different standpoint to whatever it is that we're doing. Yeah.
And I think the lady, Soroya, what she was saying is we give ourselves permission. And so much of embodiment gives us the confidence to be able to do that, to be strong within ourselves, to be confident within ourselves, and put ourselves at the table, decide that our voice matters and contribute it. It's power, it's empowering, it's empowerment, and it's power. And it kind of commands being met at that level of power.
Yeah, and actually embodying it. And as Amy mentioned, money being so strongly associated with power. And, we talked about how that at the beginning of this conversation, how women get stuck within unpaid work, etc. Were there any other conversations about money and finances and all of that kind of stuff in any of the groups? And access to resources that we've talked about, because we all need that to be able to do what we're doing, whether that's running your own business or again in corporate.
So we didn't have that in our group, Lulu, but we did end up going down a conversation where it was about women that had got further up in the ladder and perhaps either didn't support ideas from women below, which seemed completely crazy that they wouldn't have that compassion and support to collaborate and make change. Or actually those at the top that have been more like bullying in the workplace from women and between women, which isn't supporting the cause and isn't making the right kind of change. So that was a really interesting chat.
And, there being a certain level that women get to when they tend to leave and not stay in corporate, which is a massive problem. It's often a reason why lots of women start their own businesses as well, and helpful. Anyone else? Are there any groups that haven't shared what came up in their rooms? Roisin, you look like you want to say something.
I do, yeah, but it's not about anything. It was just a few conversations before. It was two things. It was one about Keely was talking about that embodiment, and I was like, yes, because I, in myself, having worked in more like traditional organizations, I felt quite locked in my body. I felt quite just literally sitting down all the time. I felt that I was quite locked in. I don't know if anyone resonates with that. And the moment now that I run my own business, I physically have that freedom and a freedom in my body. And when I am able to move, however that is, and it's all sorts of different ways, and to find these cycles in my day, I feel it physically release, allowing creativity to come out.
Yeah.
And it definitely feels like an embodiment. It's very difficult to put that into words, but yeah, that embodying it and moving unlocks something else. So it's like the movement unlocks something else, which I don't know is going to come in, and then it comes in.
Mm-hmm. And is that much more of a intuitive process? I know that resonates with me in terms of, when I was in corporate towards the end, wearing suits, I felt like stuffed and stuck and unable to move and all of that kind of stuff, that when that freedom, or creativity is a much more intuitive process. I know it certainly was for me. And again, that's very feminine nature. Not that men don't have intuition. It's not that linear.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing was, someone was talking about finding your voice. And I really admire women who have gone before me, who have used their voice, because it shows me how to use my voice. And then I hope I then empower women that are behind me to find their voice, because the more we find our voice and speak our truth, the more that we open these conversations out. So yeah, that was the only things I wanted to say.
Yeah. Any insights why we find it difficult to find our voice from Roisin or anybody else, if you do?
Sorry.
No,
you go, Roisin.
I've said enough.
No, I funny enough, a lot of what Roisin has just said and what Keely was saying has really echoed with us. I think the biggest change will come is when women have more confidence. And I think in terms of us working at all, it's still actually comparatively quite new compared to sort of men. And this is why I think sometimes we're only now just starting to find the confidence to start changing things. And I think as more women become more confident and find the voice that they want to, you will start to see real change. Funny enough, during this whole lockdown period, I was one of the unusual ones in the fact that actually I did less housework because I was having to do far more with the business, and I just didn't have the time. So then it was about saying, right, well, actually, husband and 2 children, we're sharing out the workload, and actually you guys are going to be doing more of it because I'm working longer hours than anybody. So it's about having that confidence, isn't it? And I think that's where, as women, we really start to come into our own. As soon as you have the confidence to be able to start saying what you want and how you want things to happen. And that's how I interpret success in some ways, in being able to ask for what I want to happen. So
yeah, and there's a beautiful Renee Brown quote, which I use actually in one of my self-study courses, which is don't puff up, don't shrink back, just stand your sacred ground. And I think us as women, all from, really strong backgrounds here, have found that we've either been women who puffed up, that was definitely me, defense lawyer, puffing up, take it on, bring it on, all of that, or, the shrinking back, and actually that standing your sacred ground and really articulating what it is that you want to say is so powerful, because with and I was talking about this at the beginning of the pandemic, the Second World War, women being pushed back into the home after being in the workplace, eventually then coming into the workplace, what we were coming into is masculine systems and structures, and this is where we can actually start to change that, which, as we've said, is for the benefit of everybody. It's not just for women, but we no longer have to necessarily play the game as it's been set out. There is that void that I mentioned that's opened, where we can lead differently, be that in our own businesses or in corporations. And I appreciate this is a massive question for an hour. It's a fascination of mine. It is a narrative that we're building on She Rebel Radio with all of your support as guests and listeners, and a members group, which we're building on the side of that, which I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But I would love to hear any last insights or thoughts from Amy before I do that.
Just what an interesting and important conversation it is. I mean, I think someone just put about not hearing our voice, and I just said that Mary Beard has wrote a wonderful book, Women in Power, about this. And it's not just from Victorian times. It's that our entire society and all of our legal and financial systems are based on kind of Greek and Latin reasoning, which is all about logic and intelligence. And women in those days weren't allowed to talk. And so our whole system and structure is around that. So I think the work now is to really understand who we are and what we want as women, as embodied women living on a cyclical planet with cyclical things. And then really the responsibility question is about how we're going to take, speak up ourselves, but how we're going to support other women and rebuild. So I think these conversations need to happen, but I think also it's being really brutally honest with ourselves. And I know I've talked about the money thing. I'm doing quite a lot of work on myself with money at the moment, because money is such a contracted energy. And actually, the whole expansion of femininity, right? We need to bring money into that. If you live in a world valued by money and contraction, to balance that, it's about women, earning as much, if not more, and that work being valued. So I think I'm probably just rambling now. But my own belief on the mental health stuff of women is that with most women's health issues, women have more chronic illnesses than men. And that's because we don't really know or look after our bodies properly. And mental health, I think a lot of the mental health stuff, it's no surprise to me that anxiety and depression are higher in women, because the sorts of lives that we live and the roles that we take and the work that we do. So it's about really the work is figuring out who we are, how we work, allowing that embodied experience, and then rebuilding our systems in the age of Aquarius or post-COVID or whatever one you want to take that actually fits that in.
Absolutely. So powerful. An amazing summing up of this incredible conversation. And as I said, we're going to be continuing this narrative on She Rebel Radio. We're going to continue to have roundtables and kind of build on this foundation that we've built. And we've also been building, and many of the women who are here today are in the new She Rebel Radio members group, which is away from social media. It is our own platform, because it's too important conversations like this to be had on social media, where there's all these distractions and you go on and you're distracted by X, Y, Z together. And, my calling really this year is to create more of these conversations, to bring women together who are leading from feminine principles and wanting to go deeper and make more impact with that. So I will send you an email with access to that if you want to join us in that group. There is also a free 4-week course, which is the first month of my 24 Principles to Feminine Success course, which I said I've been teaching since 2016. Now it's become more relevant than ever. And trust me, when you listen to She Rebel Radio, once you've done that course, you will hear the principles coming throughout. And it's not about rejecting the masculine principles. It's about understanding how important they are, but the feminine ones need to come in with it. We live in a world of polarities. Energetically, that's undeniable.
Thanks for listening to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for women unlearning conventional rules and creating their businesses of significance. She Rebel Radio is executive produced by award-winning coach and advocate Lulu Minns. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe. And if you're feeling social, find Lulu Minns and the She Rebel Radio community using the links below.